I'm Randy Miller. I am the Director of Research and Development at CNUC, and I'll be a moderator for a discussion of herbicides that we have coming up next. You all should have a copy of the Integrated Vegetation Management Best Management Practice. I am the principal author of that, although the review committee that we had are really responsible for the ideas. We have Jeff Kempter and Lou Payne with us today, who participated in really what was a 2-year process in revising that document. Chemical treatment options, chemical control options are a prominent part of integrated vegetation management. And the purpose of our panel discussion today is to review herbicides and how they can be applied to integrated vegetation management. We have a great panel. We have Travis Rogers, who you all know and who has been prominent in this meeting this week. And he's a marketing development specialist at Corteva. We have John Johnson, who's a program director of pesticide education at PSU. John. We have Lou Payne, who I've already introduced, and he is the manager of right-of-way and environmental at New York Power Authority. And you should all know Dr. Carolyn Mahan, who's a professor of biology and environmental studies at PSU. So we'll begin with Travis. Please come forward.
Thank you, Randy. So where I wanted to start today, I guess looking at the different roles that each of the people on the panel play, I thought it would be important as representing the herbicide industry as a basic manufacturer to talk and give you all a little bit of a glimpse into some information that you may not be aware of, that you probably don't, you hear a lot of information about herbicides or pesticides, but you may not necessarily know some of the background that goes into them. And on our side of the business, it's more common knowledge, but not necessarily so for you all. So I wanted to start with that first, just to kind of lay some groundwork. But when you think, so I wanted to start with what goes into bringing a product to market. It's a very extensive process, very expensive financially, and it takes many, many years to bring a product to market. In fact, I can't share specific numbers for Corteva, but wanted to share some industry figures with you that kind of represent the cost associated with and these numbers are actually close to a decade old. So you can imagine what they are now. We know from firsthand experience that, and we'll talk about that, maybe some of the changes that have led to that. But when you look at bringing a product to market, it costs approximately $300 million to not only discover and develop, but bring a product through the full registration process. That process can take 12 to 15 years. So it's not something that happens overnight. When we get ideas or maybe new opportunities, it really, you've got to set you've got to have long range planning and thought, and it takes a very extensive period of time to bring a product to market. And actually, one of the other things that people don't realize is the number of compounds that get screened in order to bring a product to market successfully. It's roughly 1 in 160,000. So it's quite extensive. A lot of this is based on a number of criteria. And a lot of people think that, you can just say, I want something that does this, and then you go into a lab and all of a sudden you can create something. It really doesn't work that way. A lot of things that drive the decisions that determine, when they're screening things, they're looking at, what are there resistance issues? Have there been shifts in particular pests? What are some of the regulatory challenges, but also, what is it that's going to meet the needs of the market? And so all those things factor in. And when we do that, there really is a purpose in the design. It's not just you go and see what you can find. There are a given set of criteria that are looked at, and anytime they're looking at a compound, if it does not meet those stringent guidelines or criteria, it's pretty much already thrown out. And we are currently going through that now. I mean, Damon Palmer, our business leaders here, he's got a lot more extensive knowledge and experience seeing what goes on behind closed doors, but just the regulatory environment they're in right now, we have products that the research has been done, and there's delay after delay after delay with EPA. And one of the things too, that I will say, of course, the EPA, you have to ultimately get federal registration, and then you seek state registrations. But as you go through that process, the EPA, as we've gone through time and things evolve, our culture and our society changes, the needs and the demands also change. And so what initially start as some of the testing requirements can evolve and change. And that's something I wanted to reiterate as well. When a product gets registered, it goes through a re-registration process. What is that, Damon? Is it every 10 years or about every 20 years? So just even when a product does get registered, it goes back through re-registration process, and that re-registration process can cost millions of dollars in itself. Wanted to talk a little bit about some of the studies and tests that are done, but really when I want everybody to understand that there's exhaustive tests that are done looking at not only what are the impacts on human health, but also the environment, as well as ecological impacts. And you can see here a lot of the different battery of tests that are done on these compounds when they're brought to market. In our business, one of the things that is unique is, we're primarily and almost exclusively dealing with herbicides. And sometimes what people don't realize, herbicides are a part of a larger group of compounds that represent pesticides. And sometimes they're all grouped together. And in our business, particularly when you think of insecticides and we're talking about pollinators and things of that nature, herbicides are designed to specifically work on plant processes. So they are not going to impact, at least directly, some of those, other beneficial insects and things of that nature that were very specific with the use of herbicides. Was asked to talk a little bit about messaging. And I think, again, with herbicides, things have changed. There was some market research done 15 years ago where they were doing research on public attitudes about the use of herbicides. And at that time, the percentage, almost 85% of the public either had no opinion or were okay with it. It was the number of people who were opposed or against it was very, very small. But I would say that's the sentiment has changed. I've heard twice during this meeting some of the things on social media that's been in the public out there around one particular active ingredient that's really heightened people's awareness. So for us as an industry, I do think it's very important that we're not only educated, but we educate our internal stakeholders as well as external. So it's really important to build a good plan and create that support and buy-in both internally and externally. One resource I wanted to share with folks, if you're not aware of it, some of you I know are, we started this decades ago. We've got this program called Notify Your Neighbor. It's basically a communications program, and you can go out. This is the link down there at the bottom. And if you want some assistance in developing key messages and being able to communicate both internally and externally, this is a really good resource. And right now, there's no cost associated with it. So I would encourage all of you to take a look at this if you're not familiar with it. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
All right. Keep going, huh? All right. I just need to buy it. All right. I will be quick. I believe, because I only have 7 minutes, right? And I probably have too many slides. So I apologize for that. And I will be brief with each of these. I've spent a lot of time working with the university and in industry, in industrial right-of-way weed control for the past 30 years, probably, more so with the university. And my role now is in education. Each of the states that you all represent out there has a pesticide safety education program at the university level. They also have a state lead agency, which would be the Department of Agriculture, basically, somebody that does the state regulatory and compliance portion of the use of pesticides generally. It's all over the board. I don't know if those that work in multiple states try to get people with reciprocating licenses and all of those issues to keep their crews out there and licensed. It can be a bit nightmarish because there's a lot of different rules that apply. But generally, all states require restricted certification for the use of restricted use pesticides. Many of the states require licensing when you're using general or restricted use pesticides. They require some supervision of crews that are either unlicensed or in states where there's registered technician type programs. There's some oversight that's required by those that are certified. So there's a lot of rules, and they are not easy to follow and abide by, keep everything in compliance, but they are there. And there are good educational programs around those rules if you look for them. The bottom line is good training program is key. People that are working out there and doing the work on those rights of way should be well educated and know what they're doing and be good communicators to the public to which they're dealing. You can't be in a more vulnerable place than on a right of way because you're intersecting with all these private properties. You're in the eye of the public all the time. All right. So it's important to be able to communicate well what you're doing. If people are asking those questions, being able to respond to them correctly, giving them the labels and the information certainly helps to prevent more problems down the road. As we look at certification for right-of-way, there are core manuals that give the basics, PPE, first aid, proper storage, transportation, handling of pesticides, those sorts of things. There's a number of topics that surround it. And then you get into category manuals, which get to the points of what are the plants that you're dealing with in right-of-way situations, a little bit of ID, application methods, herbicides that we might use, and strategies that you might work with on the right-of-way. If you look at EPA and what they require for certification for right-of-way or industrial weed control, there are some minimal competencies that are required that surround those things that I just spoke to. Ooh, okay. All right. I'll be quick. And I will finish on time. So if we look, these are bullet points I wanted to cover. The big one I think I want to point out to you is probably what was discussed by Carolyn yesterday as you looked at Game Lands 33 and the emphasis on management zones. So breaking down a site, whether it's an industrial site, whether it's a right of way into, different management strategies for that area that makes sense in a sustainability situation. Utilize all the tools, and we have issues, as was addressed already throughout this meeting, contending with the public and that perception of the safety around the products that we use. So we need to practice good communication skills there. Know your plants, certainly understand your herbicides. Are they labeled for the site? Do they, are they effective on the types of things that you're applying or trying to eliminate? Are they selective in situations where you want them to be selective and preserving the understory or the ground cover and the plants that you want to preserve on a right of way? What hazards or buffer zones or special language might be on those labels that we need to be cautious of? All of those things come into play when we select the herbicides and that we use in our programming. Again, not something you haven't seen before, but again, it's an important part, I think, as we look forward to how we work and develop programs for our rights of way, making sure that we're building a situation out there in the field that is sustainable for the environment is key. Right? And that can be on a right of way for roadside on the left where, you can use mowing up close to the road and you have more grass or turf ground covers on large rights of way and more selective applications and combinations with periodic brushing operations to maintain areas that are more in an area where the potential for those trees to fall onto the road is really what it's all about. You're eliminating those problematic species. Again, wire zone, border zone, same thing on the right. We have tools. And pesticides, herbicides in our case, are a very cost-effective way. It's a very cost-effective tool in what we do every day. We have to rely on brushing and crews continually. It gets pretty expensive. So we have to make that point as best we can to the public that we serve. Know your plants, don't take out plants on the left like the smooth sumac that looks very much like the tree of heaven to the right, which grows very tall, which can be more problematic. So again, knowing your plants is key, understanding your herbicides, as I mentioned before, proper application techniques where those are used is critical. So identifying those and avoiding problems generally. Soil activity, off-site movement, drift is a huge concern. Be aware of what's around the areas in which you're working. Okay, know your surroundings. And the key to that, that site was mentioned by Travis. I'm sure that's a great communication tool. Another one in 21 of the states that we have now is Field Watch. It's a database that's maintained out of, was originally developed by Purdue, but it's many of the states have them now, and it specialty crop growers, beekeepers, those sorts of groups can actually map their sites on this. It's more like a Google Earth, and there's someone that oversees those sites in each state. And it's a communication tool. Again, communication is key. And I'm going to stop there because I'm getting a double fist. And I'm looking forward to the questions.
You guys heard me talk yesterday in regards to a long-range system-wide vegetation management plan. In that plan is where you can talk about in your policy about employing the process of integrated vegetation management. Also in that plan, there's a procedure portion. So in the procedures, you can describe your techniques that you're using out there, your herbicide techniques, right? And so you can also put appendices in there. So you can put appendices in there on the products that you're using or the mixes that you're going to use on your right-of-ways. So I had an opportunity because I talked a lot about education too. And last week I had an opportunity to put a video together, a dispatch for EPRI, because EPRI had Pollinator Week, and they celebrated Pollinator Week last week. So they reached out to over 2 million people, I believe, during the course of the week. So I have this video and I wanted to share it with you. Myself and one of my foresters put this together. So. Right now? Okay. We'll start the video. Hello, pollinator people. My name is Lee Payne. I'm the right-of-way manager at the New York Power Authority. Our system is 1,400 miles or approximately 23,000 acres. My project that I want to share with you today is how I manage these right-of-ways utilizing integrated vegetation management with pollinators in mind. So come along with me and let's take a look. Integrated vegetation management, or IVM, is a system of managing plant communities. IVM controls non-compatible or tall-growing vegetation, while at the same time encouraging compatible or low-growing vegetation. Simply put, the New York Power Authority, or NYPA, is managing vegetation with vegetation. NYPA is promoting compatible plants to grow on the rights of way. You can see there are shrubs, herbs, grasses, forbs, and ferns. These are the plants that bloom throughout the growing season. And these are the plants that draw in both pollinators and other wildlife. Pollinators love our rights of way. You can see this bee on the blossoms on this apple tree. This bee actually came in and checked out our drone before we took flight to make this video. To promote pollinators with NYPA's integrated vegetation management, or our IVM approach, we have guidance steps which we follow. We assess our resources. We look at landscape considerations. We ensure there are abundant floral resources. We try to keep a mix of shrubs on the right-of-way, roughly around 30 to 40%. We select a treatment method to target the non-compatible vegetation, just like we're doing here. And most importantly, we monitor our progress. We evaluate this progress, and then we improve where necessary. When you piece all the components of IVM together with a focus on pollinators, this is what you're going to achieve. Again, managing vegetation with vegetation. Focus on this abundance and richness of the compatible vegetation. This becomes your biological control. NYPA's IVM program has opened the door for pollinators to exist statewide all across the New York Power Authority's transmission rights of way. Continuing to keep pollinators in mind throughout the vegetation management process. The possibilities are endless. Thank you for taking the time today to look at my integrated vegetation management program. I hope you enjoyed how we're keeping pollinators out on our rights of way. Happy Pollinator Week. See what you can do to bring forth your program to the public, and try to imagine putting together 3 minutes talking about IVM. Couple quick points, and I talked about this yesterday out on the right-of-way. Manage vegetation with vegetation. Our focus is on that compatible vegetation out there. We can't do that without herbicides in our toolbox. It's really important. A holistic approach. Got to look at the big picture out here. Got to look at the whole system. Look at what the business model is for the assets. Will your vegetation management program get you there? Interaction with stakeholders. We talk about that a lot. You've heard a lot of people talk about that. It's internal stakeholders, external stakeholders. So it's your contractors, it's your regulators, it's people inside the company. You got to make them understand that you're the subject matter expert on utility vegetation management, on herbicides, so that they'll come to you and talk to you. You got to make your contractors understand what they're doing and how they're applying herbicides out there, so they're doing it properly. And lastly, maintain a seat at the table. I've talked about this a lot. It's very important to have that seat at the table, whether that seat's internal with upper management to ensure that you have the right budgets to do the work out there that you're doing, or external with regulators. New York State right now has a law in place that prevents state agencies from applying glyphosate on state properties. So you need a seat at the table when they're talking about that stuff. The state agencies come to me recently and said, put together a task force that we can talk about alternatives to use in state regulated wetlands. Because right now I only have 2 products that are approved for use in New York State in wetlands. And we're trying to get more in the table, or more use there. So that way you have a seat at the table and you can have these discussions. Thank you.
Got my new slides, right, Carolyn? Okay, I'm going to spend my 5 minutes or 7 minutes talking a little bit with more data that was generated at State Game Lands 33, looking at herbicides that were used, amounts that were used, and then how native plants responded, and also how non-compatible plants responded. Again, you all were out at the right-of-way yesterday. All the plant pictures that I have in my presentation are from the right-of-way, some of the pollinator and floral resources that we have available through the use of IVM. So this is the slide that I want to spend most of my time on this morning, and I want to orient you. If you want to read more about this project, the Journal of Arboriculture and Urban Forestry, our paper was published in late 2020. It is available on our transmission line website that I provided you with the link yesterday. And also our website's really easy to find. If you just go into Google and type transmission line ecology, we are the first site that comes up, and all of our publications are available there. So let me orient you to this slide, what you're looking at here. The first 4 rows are all mechanical treatments that we looked at that stretch of State Game Lands 33 that you were on yesterday. 2 mowing treatments and 2 hand cutting treatments. And all of you who spoke with me, I took you down to show you one of the hand cutting treatments. In here, the next rows from this row all the way down to here, these are all a combination of integrated vegetation management approaches. Now, one of the, how can I word this? This is in the paper. One of the challenges of one of the great things about our project is it's been going on for so long. One of the bad things about our project is it's been going on for so long. And what I mean by that is that the herbicide application industry, as you all know, has changed dramatically. So we don't have consistency from the 1950s, nor should we. So, originally we were looking at things like high volume foliar, low volume basal, and thinking in a scientific way that that is what would be applied every 5 years to the same plot. But that's not really what happened, because what the power line company is using is integrated vegetation management. So for most of even our experimental plots, they're looking at how the vegetation has responded, applying their treatments, and then we're measuring the response of the treatments. In an ideal academic setting, the treatments would have stayed the same for the last 65 years. But so what we have here then, just to reiterate, is mechanical, some sort of mix of IVM, depending on what was needed or thought to be needed that year. And then down here, these last 2 sites are this broadcast application of herbicides. So you can see most of our sites are a mixture of IVM type application. You'll also notice that within this grouping, the amount of herbicide that was applied, and this was applied in 2012, and we measured the plant response in 2016. Okay, so you see the amount that was needed of herbicide that was applied. This is liters of herbicide per hectare, so we extrapolated out what was needed in 2012, and then the plant response that we measured in 2016. The last thing I want to show you on this slide, then we'll talk about the result, is the different types or mixtures of herbicides that were used. Now, also you have to think about, it's not just the herbicides, and some really interesting research is coming out, including on glyphosate, that herbicides, it may not be the active ingredients in the herbicides that could affect the ecology of insects. It could be the way those herbicides are applied. So how does an oil solution affect bees versus how does a water-based solution affect bees? Okay, so those are some interesting areas for research. Okay, so now you guys understand what I'm showing you, what we looked at. And again, if you look at the mechanical only type treatments, you notice they don't do a great job of controlling the number of stems of trees. These are the non-compatible trees that we count in our plots. Trees that, species that if left alone would reach the overstory and interfere with the power lines. So I don't have the statistics on here, but again, you can look at the paper, the publication, statistically higher, significantly statistically higher. I think the p-value was 0.009. Now, so you have high non-compatible species, and then what you're looking at here is the native species richness of compatible flowering plants. So you actually, on some of these plots, this particular hand cutting plot, we have a lot of compatible native plants. So you can't say, I can't say, oh, hand cutting is terrible for native plants. It's not terrible for native plants, but it doesn't create a compatible cover type for where you are working these transmission lines. You see a mix here. In fact, one of our sites, one of our IBM sites still has a lot of non-compatible stems per acre, but nice numbers of native flowering plants. And you can see that here, right? Here's another IBM site. We had to use they used a lot of herbicide, relatively a lot of herbicides in 2012, 0 stems of non-compatible trees, while at the same time maintaining good diversity of native plants. But like we're seeing with the insect data, we're seeing as herbicide application starts to increase and become more or less selective, you do start to see the number of native plants decline, which is what we would expect. So the IBM approach really seems to reach that nice balance between controlling your non-compatibles while at the same time supporting a diversity of native plants, which then support a diversity of native pollinators. Okay, so I just wanted to share that data with you again. I also, because, hold on, I know I have to show this slide because I educated the people in the field yesterday about it. I just want to quickly show you the rare fraction analysis for some of the groups. What you're seeing here is how the pollinators responded, not just to herbicide amount, but different types of treatments. And so just so you can see the blue, right here, the blue lines are a low volume foliar, and they had the highest projected diversity in that particular site. Diversity, not abundance, okay? So again, tells the story, integrated veg management, again, you can get 2 objectives achieved at once through that approach. And I'm happy to take questions about it.